How to lose weight in your 40s and 50s. That's what we're going to talk about today on the podcast. This is a part two. Last podcast episode or last video, we talked about really why it's harder to lose weight in your 40s and 50s. We talked a lot about the hormonal changes that are going on, but I didn't get to dive in as much to the how to. Okay, if that's your problem, how do you actually fix it? How do you actually get the scale to move? That's what we're going to dive into today.
Welcome to She's Healthy, a podcast for ambitious women on their journey to become the healthiest version of themselves. I'm your host, Lori Aikman.
All right, before we get started again, first, I'm Lori Aikman. If this is the first episode you've ever listened to, the first video you've ever watched, I am a nurse practitioner. I practice in the state of Florida. I have a direct primary care practice, and I also have a health coaching practice where I work with women throughout the US. And my approach is a functional medicine approach. So really looking at root cause of why symptoms are going on in your body and fixing it from there rather than just masking symptoms with medication. So before I dive in, I do have to give you my medical disclaimer. Even though I am a nurse practitioner, this podcast and these YouTube videos are for informational purposes only. So I do recommend that you consult with your doctor, your provider, your practitioner before you make any changes to your plan. All right, so let's dive in. So I just want to say, even if you are in your 30s, maybe you're even in your 20s and you're like, what is going on? I talked with a new patient today that's in her 20s and having some of these problems where she can't get the scale to budge. That is still going to apply to you. I would say just in all of the women that I talk to, it's typical that women in their 40s or early 50s kind of hit this place where weight loss is really hard and the things they used to do aren't working anymore. So that's the reasoning for the title of the podcast, the episode. But again, this applies to you even if you are not in your 40s and 50s. So in the last episode, if you didn't catch it, go back and watch that. We talked about the why. We talked about a lot of the hormonal changes that are going on in your body that can be causing you to have to struggle to lose weight. Like the things you used to do, again, aren't working anymore. And so some of those things, if you are in your 40s or 50s, it's those perimenopausal and menopausal changes that are happening that are contributing to this, having a harder time losing weight. But when it comes down to it, the core problem is insulin resistance. So just a quick review, we have when we eat food, especially when we eat carbs, right? We eat a piece of bread. Eventually it gets broken down into tiny molecules of sugar, chemically, not sugar that we find in the store that we bake with, but chemically the structure is a sugar molecule. And that sugar has to get into your cell for your body to use it for fuel. Well, insulin is the key that unlocks the door to the cell to let that sugar into your cell to be used for fuel. The problem is, because of hormonal changes, because of inflammation, because of a lot of different things, many of us become what is called insulin resistant. So the key is sticking. The key isn't quite working again. So our body, our pancreas just produces another key. Well, the problem is that when we have too much insulin, insulin is a fat storing hormone. So insulin will cause us, and this is a protective thing. I always go back to this is your body's primitive responses, your body going, okay, I have this extra fuel. I need to save it for later. So in case of time of starvation or famine, I have these extra stores that I can draw from to fuel my body. But the problem is, most of us, if you live in the United States, if you live in a, westernized country, you probably aren't going without food, right? A lot of us have lots of access to food. But so we have to really look at how do we lower insulin levels to lower blood sugar and then in order for weight loss to happen. Okay. So that's what we're going to dive into today. So I am going to start first with insulin resistance. So I'll dive into the tactics of insulin resistance, and then I'm going to talk through some of the other tweaking strategy. But if you're going to do one thing, if you're going to focus on anything. Like you can get lost in the hormones and okay, what about that? But everyone, literally everyone, step one to get the weight to move, to balance your hormones even, is to balance your blood sugar and lower your insulin levels. Because when you do have dysregulated blood sugar, meaning you have high blood sugar, low blood sugar, not nice, optimal, stable blood sugar. And when you have high insulin levels, that directly affects your ovaries. Your ovaries are what produce your sex hormones. And so that's why if you're going to balance your hormones, you've got to balance your blood sugar. How do we do that? Okay, let's dive in. So one of the things, and this might seem obvious, but one of the things we need to do if we're talking about lowering blood sugar and insulin is we need to a lot of times decrease our carbohydrate intake. So there's different schools of thought on this. I know that there are different camps that think, okay, well, no, if you're working out, you need higher amount of carbs. Well, no, you need lower amount of carbs. What I find is that it can be individualized. What somebody needs can be different from one person to another. But what I will tell you in my experience in working with patients and working with clients is that if you're really struggling with this, if you really have high blood sugar and insulin levels, and this can be higher than optimal blood sugar and insulin levels. I have clients that are athletes that are do triathlons, do marathons, are exercising regularly, are eating healthy. They're maybe 10, 15 pounds overweight, and they have higher than optimal blood sugar and insulin levels. So this doesn't mean you have to be obese and, borderline diabetic for this stuff to apply to you. This can apply to you if you're healthy by most standards, but you're struggling with that extra weight that you can't seem to lose. So what's often happened when we're in this high blood sugar and high insulin state is that our metabolism isn't working well anymore. And what we really have to do is there's a term called metabolic flexibility. We have to get our body back to where it can burn fat for fuel and it can burn carbs for fuel, and does so efficiently. And when we have high blood sugar and high insulin levels, our body is not burning carbs efficiently, right? We're storing all of it extra as fat. So what I find most women need is a time of low carbohydrate initially until their body is burning and until they're more metabolically flexible. Then we can add in those higher carbohydrate days, and sometimes this is, depending on your activity level. If you're doing some high intensity exercise, we want to give you more carbs. But initially, so for most women, this is going to look like initially limiting your carbohydrate intake. Now, of course, unless you live under a rock, everyone's heard of a ketogenic diet, right? But keto diets can be done in a way that can support women and not can support women. Just like there's men, of course, you probably all know a man that's like, right? I think of a family member who stopped drinking soda and dropped like 20 pounds, and it's a male. A lot of times for women, the process is slower. And statistically, women do lose weight much slower than men do. And a lot of it is because of our hormonal changes. But what is a strategy that, and this is not just coming from me, there's a lot of other female doctors, women that really support women through their hormones and with this, that recommend a 70-20-30 ratio. Okay, so that means 70% of your diet is coming from healthy fats. 70% of the calories you're consuming are coming from healthy fats, okay? And when we're talking, so this doesn't mean cheese. This doesn't mean, right, if you're in your 30s and 40s, 50s, maybe you've heard of the Atkins diet or something like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about eating bacon and things like that. We're talking about getting nuts and seeds in, avocado, salmon. Think of these healthy fats that are going to be higher fatty acids, right? Those are the fats that we want to be getting in through our diet. So yes, the avocado on the salad with the salmon and the olive oil and the olives, things like that. This can also be some dairy. I love pretty much every day I have a Greek salad with some feta cheese and Kalamata olives on it. So this can be some dairy, this can be goat cheese, sheep cheese, things like that. Some women may find they are more sensitive to cow's dairy, and so opting for sheep or goat dairy might be a better option for them. You really have to, this might be something that you work with somebody with, or you recognize the difference of, well, I can't really tolerate cow's milk, cow's dairy well, but I can do okay with the sheep and goat cheese, and that's because of the proteins that are different in the dairy. I'm not going to get into too much of that. Trying to stay focused. All right, so 70% of your calories coming from healthy fats. Then another 20% is coming from lean proteins. So this is, again, things like chicken, fish. This can be lean pork. This can be a lean cut of beef. This can be shrimp, whatever types of protein that you like. I will say, again, trying not to go down a rabbit hole, I find that people are optimally healthy when they do have some animal protein. I know there's tons of people in the vegan, vegetarian camp, but when we look at optimal functioning, optimal cellular functioning long term, people who do have some animal protein in their diet tend to have better vitamin and mineral absorption, and they're getting nutrients from those foods that we just can't get from plant sources. Now, I do recommend, as much as you're able, to get your proteins from clean sources. So whether that is, grass-fed beef or, free range organic chicken, things of that nature. But I know that's like next level. Let's focus on, if you're like, I'm shopping at Aldi and that's all I can afford, I'm feeding my family of 6, whatever it is. I totally get it. Let's start with chicken, fish, start with those lean protein sources. And then when you're able to, maybe add the organic and the grass-fed and things like that in down the road. Okay. So again, 70% healthy fats, 20% lean proteins, and then the other 10% coming from carbohydrates. Caveat with this isn't any carbohydrate. This really means we want those carbohydrates coming from healthy sources. So this is a lot of veggies. I want people to get in. Vegetables are a source of carbohydrate, right? Um, so looking at, instead of having a piece of bread, having a potato, having a winter squash, having Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts actually provide a decent amount of carbs. You might be surprised. But making sure, think about, a lot of people say shopping the perimeter. So going, if you're going to your produce section and getting your carbohydrates from that section. This could look like grains, wild rice, things like that. But again, we're limiting that carbohydrate intake because what we want to do is limit our sugar intake, which will help to bring down our insulin levels. Okay. And again, this is not long term. This can be for a time until your body has adapted and you can go back to eating some higher carbohydrates. All right. Then the next strategy, so yes, a lower carb diet, but then another strategy that's very effective and very popular out there for lowering blood sugar and insulin levels is intermittent fasting. Okay, so intermittent fasting, some of you might have tried it before and you're like, I cannot do that. I like to think of intermittent fasting as going back to how our ancestors used to eat. If we look just back in the 70s, most people had breakfast in the morning, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, had lunch about 11 or 12, and then had dinner, by 5 or 6 p.m. And they ate 3 meals a day. Versus in the early 2000s, most people were eating 6 meals a day and eating much extended times, eating as soon as they wake up and eating before they go to bed at night. And they might have even thought that was healthy. You may have even been told, well, you need to eat more frequently to speed up your metabolism. That's going to help you to lose weight. Well, what we found is that actually when you're eating frequently like that, you're causing spikes in insulin, and you're never allowing the blood sugar and insulin to go back down to a baseline. And so we're actually, with eating those frequent meals like that, we're spiking blood sugar. So the evidence is really strong for intermittent fasting as a way to lower blood sugar and insulin levels. Now, intermittent fasting doesn't mean you're just starving yourself and you're not eating at all. But again, you're just narrowing, think about just narrowing that window. So I talked to a patient today who said she eats between 12 and 8 p.m., about noon to 8 p.m., and that seems to work well for her body. Now, I want to tell you, I could do a podcast episode on each of these strategies. But if you are eating, say you ate breakfast at 6 a.m. and you're eating dinner at 8, 9 o'clock at night, right? You going to shortening your window drastically is going to be a big change, and it's going to be a stressor on your body. So what we recommend, what is recommended by, I think, most people out there, is slowly shifting over, kind of narrowing that window, moving your dinner up by 15 minutes each day, or moving breakfast up by 15 minutes each day, and gradually shifting over. And the evidence is really strong behind a 16-8 ratio. So that means you're fasting, you're not eating for 16 hours of the day, and then you're eating in an 8-hour window. Again, I could go on so many rabbit holes here. I just want to give the caveat. If you are premenopausal, if you have not gone through menopause and you are still cycling, intermittent fasting can actually inhibit or hinder your hormones during the second half of your cycle. So when you ovulate to before when you start your period, we call this the luteal phase. We don't want to be too restrictive with our diet during this time because that can affect our hormone levels, specifically progesterone. So this is something where before you dive into an intermittent fasting plan, don't hear this and like go, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do a 16-8. Let's do your research, maybe work with somebody, read some books, listen to some more podcasts, to, figure out the plan that's going to work best for you and your body. Okay. I try to keep these episodes short and sweet. But again, there's so much we could dive into. But the other key thing I want to talk about when it comes to weight loss in your 40s and 50s or in your 20s and 30s, the thing that I see so much, and we talked about this in the last episode, is that we lose muscle mass as we age. At age 30, remember we talked about that growth hormone decreasing and it being harder for us to maintain our muscle. I can tell you, even just in the last 3 years, having children, I'm not exercising to quite the extreme I was before. I have a background in CrossFit, and I've seen my muscle, especially in my arms, I've seen my muscles get smaller over that time. But then there's also age playing a role here too, and that growth hormone decreasing because I am almost 40 now. So again, muscle helps us. So muscle is obviously the more muscle we have. I mean, maybe this is not obvious, but the more muscle we have, the faster our metabolism is going to be, right? Think of your athletes, right? They eat a lot of food because their body burns a lot of calories, right? So the more muscle you have, the faster your metabolism is, right? But then also our muscle makes us more insulin sensitive. So that means our body, right, is not going to, when the key is not going to stick. The insulin is going to open the door easily to let the sugar into the cells, right? So not only are we going to burn, but we're going to be much more fuel efficient, things like that, the more muscle we have. And they might hear this and be like, there's so many women think if they go into the gym, going into the gym to lift weights can be intimidating. I get that, totally get that. And then two, you might think, well, if I lift weights, I'm going to get bulky. Some women, I have patience with this. Like when I'm lifting weights, my arms get really big and then my shirts don't fit. Things like that can be a big concern. And I totally get that because it affects how we feel about ourselves. It affects our body image. But what we find with building muscle is that it takes time, right? So you may notice as you start building muscle, you might gain some weight. But if you're gaining lean muscle mass, right, you're going to, I can testify to this even in myself. You are going to lose fat as you gain muscle. It just may take time for you to actually see that. It can be really beneficial for you to have access to a scale that really shows your body composition. So shows you not only just what your weight is, but how much body water there is, how much muscle there is, and how much fat there is. But okay, let's talk about some strategies. So if you're not going to join a gym tomorrow and start working out right away, what are some things you can do? So this looks like resistance training. This looks like doing push-ups, sit-ups, lunges, air squats. There's so many programs. If you looked up body weight exercise on YouTube, you can find videos of, health coaches, things like that, trainers taking you through some exercises that you can do to help start strengthening and building your muscle. This does not mean you have to join a gym and you have to be, picking up barbells. You can do, my mom found this Instagram account of this girl who does solely body weight exercises. So she's not using any weights. She's not in the gym. She's doing exercises at home using her own body to build muscle, and to see her results over time are really, really great. So there are resources out there for that. And that's a great way to get started. I have an athletic background. I love to lift weights. I think lifting weights is really cool because I feel really strong and really confident when I do. But you need to pick something that is going to work for you and that you're going to stick to. It may be beneficial for you to work with somebody, whether that's a trainer or something like that, to kind of get started and get you feeling more comfortable with that. But another key piece here is I see so many women thinking that in order to lose weight, they need to burn more calories. And so they're running, they're doing spin classes, they're doing all this cardio. And it's just driving up inflammation and driving up blood sugar and insulin more. So I recommend that no more than 50% of your workouts be cardio, and at least 50% of your workouts be weight or resistance training. Okay. I am definitely at 30 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up here. If you guys love this episode, if you learned something new, I would love it if you, found me on Instagram. I'm at Lori Aikman. I have a Facebook, professional page. I'm on Instagram at Lori Aikman. Wherever you find me, shoot me a DM, maybe take a screenshot of this episode and tag me on social. I'd love to hear that you learned something new. This is beneficial to you. Pass this on too. If you know somebody who's in the same boat as you and really struggling, pass on the information so that they can get the help they need to start seeing the results in their body. And if you're curious about working with a lot of plans, include what I'll do is put the booking link in the show notes, and you can book an interest call and we can talk through what you're looking for and see what the best next step for you is. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. I'll see you in the next episode.